Hello, I was having a chat with another booktuber on her channel, April Sarah. I'll put her channel in the description below, along with a list of all of the stories that I mentioned. And she was showing off her Christmas book. I mentioned that for me, this time of year has always been synonymous with ghost stories and spooky tales and that kind of thing. So I recommended a couple, and then I thought, why don't I recommend 10 to lots of people, or a few. Some of them might be Edwardian rather than Victorian, and the weird tales I think are even newer, so you might get some from the 20s or thereabouts. Okay, so number one is Signalman by Charles Dickens. I started off with someone who I know everyone recognises. They did a version of it on the BBC, and it's good, I like it. The ending is spooky, but I think you can't beat reading the original as well, so make sure you do that. And I think there's a LibriVox version on YouTube, so have a Google and I'm pretty sure it will come up. Number two is Number 13 by M.R. James. I managed to get hold of some audio of Christopher Lee reading some M.R. James stories, and his stories were meant to be read aloud. That's what they were originally intended for. He wrote them to read out at the end of the school year, sort of around Christmas time, I think, so because he was a teacher. So I think that's probably another reason why ghost stories are, just to at least people from the UK, means Christmas. This one particularly is quite spooky. There's a definite kind of weirdness to it, and there's a kind of uncanny quality to it. So if you can find the Christopher Lee audio, I highly recommend that. But if not, there's bound to be other audio versions out there. Number three is John Charrington's Wedding by Edith Nesbitt. I did do a reading of this on my channel for some people that I did a few years ago, but if you don't want to hear me mumbling through it, then you'll be able to find it online, I'm pretty sure. But it's kind of just a classic, quiet, spooky story, and I think that a good ghost story has some sadness to it, and this is definitely an example of it, the ghost representing lost future, lost hope. Lovely Christmas message there. Number four, My Own True Ghost Story by Rudyard Kipling. It's kind of a mischievous one to slip in. It's not what you'd expect, and I think some people might find it a bit of a spoil sport. I don't. I kind of appreciate it because I like mischief, and I'm not hugely a believer of the paranormal, although, you know, if you believe it, that's fine. But I enjoyed it just because it was a bit different to everything that I had read regards to Victorian ghost stories before. Now, I couldn't choose between Caterpillars and The Bus Conductor by E.F. Benson. They're both very good. Caterpillars has got a kind of sickly, oozing feel to it. You'll understand if you read it. And The Bus Conductor is such a classic that you'll recognise it in various forms. For example, they did an episode very similar, taking the idea of it in the Twilight Zone. And also, if you're familiar with a film called The Dead of Night, which was, I think, 1945, they did a version of it there. When you read it, you'll know exactly what it is. Number six is The Grey Woman by Elizabeth Gaskell. It's a Gothic take on a classic fairy tale. And Gothic tales are, as we know, gruesome, spooky, but yeah, no, it's good fun, but also has a kind of social society message in there. She marries a man who turns out to be quite cruel, but finds out that he has a bit more of a secret than she expected. 7 is The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with this by now. It's seen as a sort of early feminist tale. It's a lot more quiet and understated than The Grey Woman, and it has a real feel to it, and that is because she was prescribed the rest cure, which began to play with her mind, and and that's what this Gothic story is all about. Number 8 is Schalken The Painter by Sheridan and Fanu. Again, they did a version of this on the BBC. It's very pretty, but it's a little bit slow. The original story is, you know, Gothic tales tend to sort of zip through, and they're exciting. They're a kind of action movie, horror action movies of the time. So yeah, it's good fun. Number 9 is Ravis Haunt by Robert Aickman. His stories tend to have an element to them which is hard to describe. It's difficult to explain why they make you feel uncomfortable, and if you just look at the bare facts of the story, sometimes you think, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why has this happened, and what does that mean? But it's a feeling that you get, and this one's particularly my favourite because of the strange sense of threat and the Freudian element of it as well, I think. Yeah, it's intriguing. Number 10 is The Open Window by Saki. This is one of my favourites overall when it comes to short fiction. He was a mischievous imp, and his stories have a sense of humour to them which I just love, and I think that people like Roald Dahl were influenced by him, particularly when Roald Dahl came to write Tales of the Unexpected. Yeah, Saki, I can't recommend him enough. This one is probably it might be the best known, but it's definitely one of my favourites. So there we go, there are our Christmas tales. There's so much out there: Victorian ghost stories, Gothic fiction, classic weird tales. I mean, all year round is good for these stories, but this time of year particularly, I'd just like to be all cosy and read some short fiction and get myself a little bit spooked. Enjoy!